Hello and welcome to this 400th episode of C++ Weekly. That's right, I have been doing this for 400 weeks straight, which sounds kind of crazy. Well, my name is Jason Turner, and I am your host, and I am available for code reviews and on-site training, as always. So definitely contact me if you are interested in C++ training. So back on August 26th of this year, I put out this poll suggesting several different topic ideas for my 400th episode. And the poll that won by a very large margin was the topic of Is C++ Dying? Now, unfortunately, Bryce and Connor somehow beat me to this particular title in the episode that they released October 6th of 2023 in the ADSP podcast, which they titled Is C++ Dying? So I will be referencing their podcast throughout this episode, and I hope you enjoy it. This episode is sponsored by JetBrains. As C++ developers, we are honored to contribute to self-driving technology, simplify lives with many useful embedded devices, and support financial ecosystems. Truly, C++ is now at the essence of almost everything. But to keep up with the pace of development, we need tools that help us work quickly and effectively every day. CLion is a cross-platform IDE by JetBrains that makes this challenge its main goal, integrating code analysis, refactoring, debugging, and the best ecosystem tools natively into your day-to-day development workflows. Use CPP Weekly CLion to get 25% off at checkout when you purchase a new CLion subscription or renew your existing one. Now, first of all, let's talk about the plan for this episode. I'm going to not necessarily talk about the evolution of the language specifically. I'm going to talk more about the statistics of who currently uses C++ and the growth of the user base. And hopefully these are topics that you will find interesting. Now, I did say that I'm going to mention ADSP here, and spoiler alert, I guess, is they both basically agree that C++ is dying because the language evolution has slowed down. And I'm not going to be focusing on that specifically, but I will say it is definitely a matter of opinion if you think that the language evolution has stopped to the point that the language is not growing in meaningful ways. Okay, so the original genesis of this episode came from last year, where there was a series of articles published by various government organizations, specifically in the United States and specifically related to the NSA, saying that they are urging organizations to move away from C++ and to memory-safe languages such as C#, Go, Java, Ruby, or Swift. And you can read all of these things. I have a link in this video description that will take you to the full outline for this talk and all of the various resources that I am going to be discussing. And then you have, at the end of 2022, this article from ACCU calling 2022 the year of C++ successor languages. And I feel like this is actually a pretty fair assessment that 2022 was the year of C++ successor languages. Many people referenced those articles from the NSA saying that we needed to stop using C++, and we got three prominent announcements. If you were to go and look at the history of C++ Now and CPPCon in 2022, which are two of the major C++ conferences, you will see keynotes, not just references, but prominent keynotes for upcoming successor languages. And this was true also at CPP North in Canada. Specifically mentioned is CPP Front from Herb Sutter, which is meant to be a higher level, I guess, experimental front-end to C++, similarly to how CFront was Bjarne's first version of C++, CVP front, you write code and it emits C++. And in fact, that's a bit of a theme. Most of these C++ successor languages in some way or another emit C++ code. Next up was the Carbon Lang, which is a project largely from people inside of Google. That is, again, meant to be a replacement for C++. And then finally, we have the Hilo programming language, which was originally named Vel, and again was announced during a keynote presentation at a prominent C++ conference. So that was 2022, and we are nearing the end of 2023. So surely all of these successor languages have just finished off C++. We have a clear winner, and C++ is dying, and we can move on. Well, it seems that that's not necessarily true. And I'm not sure how to best present the rest of what I have to talk about, but we'll just see what happens. First of all, we know that Photoshop and a lot, perhaps most, if not all of the Adobe suite is written in C++. And how do we know that? We know that because Sean Parent, one of the longtime developers at Adobe, is a regular speaker at C++ conferences about C++ things. Now, we also know that Microsoft Office is written in C++, at least largely. And again, how do we know that? We know because there have been a lot of Microsoft developers from the Office team that have presented at C++ conferences. Now, we also know that OpenOffice and LibreOffice are mostly written in C++. And we know this because they are open source projects, and we can easily go and look at their source code. We also know that Firefox is largely written in C++, again, because it is open source. Google Chrome, and by extension, almost every other web browser that is in use today, because most of them use Chromium for their web browser, are both written in C++, and again, we know this because they are open source projects, and it's easy to go verify this, at least mostly written in C++. Also, Ladybird, the relatively new greenfield web browser that's part of the Serenity OS project and has been making some waves lately, is also written in C++. Again, it is open source, and we can verify this. So I feel like at this point, I could just stop. I could say, okay, your Adobe suite, your Microsoft suite, all of the Office suites basically that are in common use today, and all of the major web browsers that are in use today are all written in C++, and that effectively sums up virtually every single thing that you do on a daily basis on your computer. But I won't stop here. As a viewer pointed out before I started recording this episode, virtually every database engine is written in C++. Your C compiler is written in C++, or C++ compiler, which includes GCC and Clang. Again, they're open source, and at least large portions of Visual Studio's C++ compiler. And again, we know this because people give conference talks about these things. And the simple fact that both GCC and Clang, and by extension LLVM, are written in C++, this means that basically every other programming language on the planet relies on C++ in some way. The LLVM backend, it's written in C++, therefore Rust relies on C++, generally speaking, for generating its optimized binary. And we can keep going with the fact that TensorFlow is at least largely, if not mostly, written in C++. And that is powering an awful lot of the machine learning things that we are doing today. And you might notice as well that OpenJDK is written in C++ again. And if that was not enough, V8, which is one of the most popular JavaScript engines, again is 68.7% C++. We can continue. We know that your game engine, be it Unreal, Godot, Unity, or O3DE, are all written in C++. And I can just kind of say anecdotally that I have personally done training or contracting with companies in the gaming, energy modeling, simulation, physics, industrial, embedded, construction, GPS, automotive, medical, airline, security, data, financial, manufacturing, and audio industries. I know that all of these industries use C++, and therefore it is deployed in probably hundreds of billions, if not trillions of lines of C++ code around the world. But you might rightfully ask at this point, what have I actually proven here? And it's not much. I'm saying that C++ is used in literally every industry and every software, and everything that you are currently using to watch this video right now, considerable portions of it are written in C++, but the language could still be dying, I guess. So let's talk about that specifically. I'm just going to pull up the Wikipedia entry here on the history of C++. Now, Bjarne started his experiments with C++ in 1979, but it didn't actually get its name until 1983, as I understand it, although it could have been 1982. I'm hoping it was 1983, because this makes for a good around 40-year history here for the sake of this episode. And it took quite some time before C++ really became standardized in the official way, and that was in 1998. Then the language had a bit of a bug fix for C++ 03. Generally, those of us today will say C++ 98 when we mean C++ 03. And then there was a long stagnation period while the standards committee tried to figure out exactly how they could release a new version of C++. And those of us who were around at the time were used to this moniker of C++ OX because we were expecting an update to come out, before that became a 1 for that first digit. But that's not what happened. We didn't get a new standard until C++ 11. But then at that point, the committee was committed to a 3-year release cycle. And we have on schedule 11, 14, 17, 20, and 23. That is just about ready for official standardization. I believe all the wording is done on it, and C++ 26 features have been begun. Now, I think at this point it's appropriate to pull out the plrank.com website, which is from Connor Hoekstra, who was mentioned earlier at the start of this episode, who is one of the hosts of ADSP podcast. And this is an aggregate of all of the different language ranking websites out there, which everyone loves to hate on these things. But it's interesting to note that even in Connor's aggregate website here, we show over the last 6 months that C++ in aggregate is not changed. It is staying in exactly 6th place. And I might propose that you browse this plrank website and browse some of the things that it's linked to, just to kind of give yourself a feel for what are the most popular languages. Perhaps you are deciding where to go next in your career, and if you want to aim for the top mainstream to make sure that you always have a job, you can do that. Or if you want to aim towards the bottom of the list, perhaps, and say you want to specialize in Scala and Swift and R, and make a bit of a niche for yourself in your career. Just could be an interesting way to look at these things. Okay, so let's look at the ones that everyone loves to hate on. Now, this is the TIOBE software index, and I'm going to focus on C++. I can highlight this little graph. Come on, you can do it. There we go. And you can see, according to TIOBE, that it has C++ was losing in popularity up to 2018, which for those of us in the industry actively programming in C++ seems highly improbable. But then from 2018 upward, it's been largely on an upward trend. And now I'm going to pull up languish, and I'm going to again highlight C++ so we can see this chart. It's this purple highlighted line. And I say line because it looks like C++ has kept an almost flat market share for the last, 10 years, according to this website. Interesting to note, the ones that are continuously growing is Python. So if you want to be on a language that is growing a lot, Python might be a good answer, which is another reason why I do talk about Python from time to time on this YouTube channel. Now I want to also show the Octoverse language trends, which is incredibly simplified compared to all of the other data. And this is from GitHub, and so it's reporting what they see on GitHub itself. And C++ has gone from 6th to 5th to 7th to 6th, and it's currently on an upward trend according to this. Now I'm going to take one final look at a little bit of statistics here from Anastasia Kazakova's presentation at CDPCon 2023, surveying the community, what could possibly go wrong. I'm going to preface this by the fact that this is data that has been collected by JetBrains, and JetBrains has an entire team devoted to tracking language trends and the needs of the developer community, because this is absolutely core to their business. They need to know which way things are going to make sure that they provide the products that customers want to buy. So I don't believe that they have any particular bias here, and if you watch Anastasia's talk after it comes out, you'll see that they go through a lot of effort to try to reduce the bias that they do collect. So a couple of high-level statistics. First of all, they estimate that there are between 12,300,000 and 14,800,000 professional programmers around the world as of 2022. They went through the effort of trying to figure out what percentage of these developers are C++ developers. Their numbers show that somewhere between 8 and 9% of professional programmers use C++ as their primary programming language. So this works out to about 1.1 million professional developers who use C++ as their primary language in 2023, and about 2.5 million professional programmers who regularly use C++ in 2023. And this is their chart. Now, again, if you listen to Anastasia's talk, you will see that the 2018 data might be slightly suspect, and we see some interesting anomalies here where perhaps the number of C++ developers were overestimated, but you see that their chart is showing generally speaking, an upward trend in C++ developers. Although across the board, we see a little bit of a dip in languages for most years for 2023, except for TypeScript. TypeScript is growing, and Rust is growing down here, but most of them stay flat or have a slight upward trend. So I'm thinking C++ is not dying. You could argue that it is perhaps stagnating in growth. But there's one further thing that I would like to show you. Now I'm going to use Compiler Explorer for this example, and I am going to show you a typical C++ Hello World. Now you've probably seen something like this many times, or even worse. This is the kind of example that we have come to expect from our C++ Hello World. If you're a fan of this channel, you know I don't like endel, particularly in this example, because it's completely meaningless. The standard requires that the output stream be flushed before a normal termination of the program. And that's what endel gives you, so you might do this. Or again, if you've seen other episodes of this channel, you may have seen this version, although that's not widely accepted as a C++ Hello World, because that relies on the old school C function puts. Now what I'm getting at is this is examples for things before C++ 23. C++ 23 is the first release of the language since C++ 98, when namespaces were added, to fundamentally change the look of our Hello World example. Some might argue that C++23 didn't ship any major features, but if it's the first release in 25 years that actually changes the way Hello World looks, I think that counts as a fundamental change to the language and proves that this language is not dying yet. So of course, I would like to encourage you to subscribe to this channel and like this video and share it with your friends. And I want you to post your comments as to whether or not you think I made a valid case that C++ is still alive and well.